My name is Stephanie, and for as long as I can remember, the world my family inhabited felt like a foreign country. It was a place of polished chrome, hushed leather interiors, and the quiet, surgically precise language of European engineering. Miller & Sons Luxury Imports, the sign read, a gleaming brass monument to the empire my father, Arthur Miller, had built from the ground up. My brothers, Chad and Kyle, were his sons in every sense of the word. They moved through the dealership's showroom like sharks in their native water, dressed in suits that cost more than my monthly rent, their words weaving intricate spells around clients to part them with 6 or even 7 figures for the latest Italian or German masterpiece. They were good at it. They had the Miller charm, the easy confidence, the scent of success. And they had always been embarrassed by me. I didn't speak their language. My native tongue was the guttural roar of a V8 engine, the scent of gasoline and rust inhibitor, the satisfying heft of a torque wrench in my hand. I was the grease monkey, the family's dirty little secret, the sister who didn't fit in the glossy brochure of their lives. While they curated collections of carbon fiber and Alcantara, I spent my days, nights, and weekends in a dusty, rented garage on the industrial side of town, surrounded by what they so lovingly called my heap of junk. Classic American muscle cars. To them, they were crude, loud, unsophisticated relics. To me, they were history, they were art, they were honest. They were the soul of the automobile, stripped bare of pretension. The jokes were relentless, a constant, low-grade hum of disapproval that followed me through every family dinner, every holiday gathering. "Still playing with your rusty toys, Steph?" Kyle would ask, a smirk playing on his perfectly sculpted lips. "Find any more priceless hubcaps at the junkyard?" Chad would add, to a chorus of laughter from their equally polished wives. They saw my passion as a childish pathology, a refusal to grow up and join the real world. Their world. Working at the family business was a door that had been quietly but firmly locked to me since I was a teenager. "It's a certain image we have to maintain, Stephanie," my father had told me once, his voice gentle but his words like steel. "Our clients expect a certain level of sophistication. Your hobby, it doesn't align." It was the kindest, most brutal rejection I had ever received. But this year, something shifted. Chad and Kyle had decided it was time for Miller & Sons to go national, to make a name for themselves on the biggest stage of them all, the famous Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance and its accompanying auto auction. They poured everything into it, a staggering amount of the company's capital and their own personal funds, to secure a prime spot on the auction block, bringing a trio of immaculate, low-mileage European hypercars. They were convinced this was their moment, the move that would elevate them from successful regional dealers to globally recognized players. They talked about it incessantly, their voices buzzing with a self-important fervor. They didn't know that my moment was coming, too. They didn't know that the rusted-out, forgotten shell of a car I had dragged out of a collapsing barn in rural Ohio, a car I bought for $1,000 from a farmer who thought it was worthless scrap, was not just another piece of junk. They didn't know that beneath the layers of decay and neglect lay the bones of a ghost, a legend whispered about only in the most obsessive circles of automotive history. A one-of-one factory prototype, an experimental design that was deemed too wild, too powerful for production, and was supposed to have been destroyed decades ago. They didn't know that for the past 18 months, I had poured every ounce of my life, my money, and my soul into a frame-off, nut-and-bolt restoration, a resurrection of a forgotten king. In just a few hours, the auction at Pebble Beach is set to feature a last-minute addition, a surprise barn find that has the entire community buzzing. Soon, a car that hasn't been seen in public for 50 years will roll onto the block under the blindingly bright lights. And when the auctioneer, a man whose voice can command millions of dollars with a single word, finishes telling its unbelievable story, he will introduce its restorer and its sole owner, me. My brothers think this is their day to finally step into the sun. They have no idea they are about to be caught in my eclipse. Before I dive into how I found myself in this position, standing in the wings of the world's most prestigious car auction, my heart hammering against my ribs like a piston with a thrown rod, let me ask you something. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever had a passion that someone close to you just didn't understand or even mocked, hit that like button. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel, because this community is for everyone who knows what it's like to have to prove your worth. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because I have a feeling this story of grease, gears, and family drama is a universal one. It all started as most family dysfunctions do in childhood. Our garage at home wasn't a pristine showroom like the dealership. It was my father's first workshop, the place where he'd started his own journey. He used to work on cars himself, back before the money and the suits. By the time I was old enough to hold a wrench, however, that part of him was mostly dormant. The garage was his sanctuary, filled with old tools and the lingering smell of motor oil. For Chad and Kyle, it was just a cluttered space they passed through on their way to their bicycles. For me, it was magical. My father, in his rare moments of nostalgia, would show me the basics. This is a socket wrench, Steffi. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. He taught me how to change the oil in my mother's sedan, how to check the spark plugs. I was a quick study, my small hands able to get into tight spaces his couldn't. For a brief, shining period, it felt like our thing. I was about 10 years old when I found an old, discarded lawnmower engine in the back of the garage. I spent an entire summer taking it apart and putting it back together, my fingernails permanently black, my clothes stained with grease. When I finally got it to sputter to life, I ran into the house, screaming with a joy so pure it felt like it would burst out of my chest. Dad! Dad, I did it! It works! I yelled, dragging him by the hand. He came out, a tired smile on his face, and watched the little engine cough and smoke. Good job, kiddo, he said, patting my head. But then Chad and Kyle, already teenagers and steeped in the dealership's culture of perfection, came out. They took one look at my greasy face, my triumphant grin, and the sputtering engine, and they burst out laughing. What is that thing? Chad sneered. Are you going to build a go-kart out of garbage? Kyle added, Dad, you're not seriously encouraging this, are you? She looks like she crawled out of a sewer. I saw something flicker in my father's eyes. It was a retreat. The shared joy vanished, replaced by a familiar weariness, the path of least resistance. He just sighed. All right, boys, that's enough. Stephanie, maybe clean up a bit before dinner. He didn't defend me. He didn't share in my pride. He just managed the conflict. That was the day I learned my passion was something to be managed, not celebrated. As the years went on, the divide grew into a chasm. Chad and Kyle went to business school, groomed from the start to take over the family enterprise. Their summers were spent at the dealership, learning the art of the sale, memorizing the specs of the newest Porsche, the whisper-quiet ride of a Rolls-Royce. My summers were spent under the hood of my first car, a beat-up 1969 Ford Mustang I'd bought with money I saved from a dozen different part-time jobs. It was a disaster when I got it. The engine was seized, the floor pans were rusted through, and the interior smelled like a family of raccoons had been living in it. To my brothers, it was proof of my deviance. They would bring their friends by my parents' house, pointing at the car in the driveway like it was a circus attraction. That's my sister's car. I once overheard Chad telling a friend. Yeah, she's different. The word hung in the air, heavy with pity and condescension. My father's support remained passive and noncommittal. He'd give me pointers if I asked him directly, a flicker of the old mechanic showing through. You'll want to use a thread chaser on that bolt hole, not a tap, or you'll ruin the block, he'd murmur, almost as if he were embarrassed to be caught speaking my language. But he never once stood up to my brothers. He never once said, "What your sister is doing is incredible. It takes skill and dedication." Instead, the family narrative was set in stone. Chad and Kyle were the ambitious, successful heirs. I was the quirky, grease-stained hobbyist. A harmless eccentric, as long as I was kept at arm's length from the precious brand. The ultimate rejection came when I was 22. I had just finished community college, getting a degree in automotive technology with a specialization in fabrication. I had completely rebuilt that Mustang, transforming it from a wreck into a stunning, award-winning show car. I'd done it all myself, the engine, the bodywork, the paint. I won Best in Show at a local car meet, and the trophy felt heavier and more valuable than gold. I thought naively that this was my proof. This was my resume. I walked into the dealership the next Monday, trophy in hand, and asked to speak to my father. Chad and Kyle were in his office, and the three of them looked at me like I'd tracked mud all over their Persian rug. Dad, I started, my voice shaking a little. I wanted to talk about a job. In the service department. I know you guys subcontract a lot of the classic car work that comes in. I could do it. I could build a whole restoration wing for the dealership. I placed the trophy on his massive mahogany desk. For a moment, there was just silence. My father looked at the trophy, then at my brothers, then back at me. Kyle was the first to break. He let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like tearing silk. A restoration wing? Stephanie, do you know what our customers drive? They don't drive that, he said, waving a dismissive hand in the direction of my unseen Mustang. They drive new Ferraris. They drive Bentleys. Our mechanics are factory-certified technicians who go to Germany for training. They don't use hammers and welding torches. What you do is a craft, sweetheart, Chad said, his tone dripping with condescending sweetness. It's cute, but it's not a business. Not our business, anyway. We have a reputation for being on the cutting edge. Not for dealing with rusty old farm equipment. I looked at my father, my heart pleading with him to see me, to see the skill, the dedication. To see the value in what I could do. He just picked up the trophy, ran his thumb over the little gold-plated car on top, and set it back down. Stephanie, he said, his voice quiet. Your brothers are right. It's a different world. The liability, the investment, it just doesn't fit our business model. I'm proud of you, I really am. But this isn't the place for you. Proud of me, but not enough to give me a chance. Proud of me, but not enough to risk the pristine image of his brand. I walked out of that office without another word, leaving the trophy on his desk. I never went back to the dealership as anything other than a reluctant guest at a family function. The message was clear. I wasn't a Miller. I was just a Miller-adjacent curiosity. That rejection was the catalyst. It hurt more than I could ever put into words, a deep foundational crack in my sense of self. But underneath the pain, something else began to harden. It was a cold, quiet resolve. If they wouldn't let me into their world, I would build my own. I rented the cheapest garage I could find, a cinderblock box with a leaky roof and faulty wiring. It was my kingdom. I started taking on small jobs, brake repairs for neighbors, engine tune-ups for friends. The money was barely enough to cover rent and ramen noodles, but it was mine. And every spare dollar, every spare moment, went into my own projects. I'd buy forgotten cars that most people would have sent to the crusher, and I would bring them back to life. A 67 GTO, a 70 Challenger, a 68 Camaro. Each one was a lesson. Each one was a piece of me. It was during this time that I met Sal. He owned a dusty old auto parts store, the kind of place that was an institution, a relic from a bygone era. The air inside smelled of old cardboard, rubber, and dust. Sal was in his 70s, with hands as gnarled as ancient tree roots and eyes that had seen every automotive trend come and go. He could identify a water pump for a 1953 Studebaker from 20 feet away. I came in one day, desperate for a specific type of bolt for the GTO's manifold, one that hadn't been produced in 40 years. I'd been to a dozen stores with no luck. I described it to him, and he just grunted, disappeared into the labyrinthine shelves in the back, and returned 5 minutes later with a small, greasy box. Here you go, kid, he said, wiping the bolt on his rag before handing it to me. That's for a high-compression 400. You building something interesting? That was the beginning of our friendship. I told him about my projects, and he listened, not with the polite disinterest of my family, but with a genuine, engaged curiosity. He'd come by my garage sometimes, leaning against a workbench and watching me work. He never offered unsolicited advice, but if I was stuck, he always knew the answer. You're trying to muscle it, he said once as I struggled to align a fender. Stop. Go have a coffee. Come back and finesse it. These cars, they don't respond to anger. They respond to respect. He was the first person in my world, other than me, who saw the art in what I did. He saw the history I was preserving. He became the grandfather I never had, the mentor my own father couldn't be. You've got the touch, kid, he told me one afternoon, after watching me perfectly gap a set of spark plugs by feel. Your hands know things your brain ain't even figured out yet. Don't ever let anyone tell you that ain't a gift. His words were a balm on the raw wound of my family's dismissal. They were a shield I held up against the constant barrage of their jokes and their pity. The story of the Phoenix, that's what I came to call the car, began with a phone call from Sal. Got a weird one for you, Steph, he said, his voice crackling over the phone. My cousin's wife's brother, you know how it is. Anyway, he's selling off his farm up in Ohio. Cleaning out the barns. He's got some old car in one of them, been sitting since the 70s. Says if someone doesn't haul it out for $1,000, it's going to the scrapper next week. Thought of you. What kind of car is it, Sal? I asked, already picturing some rusted-out Ford Falcon or a dilapidated Chevy pickup. He doesn't know, Sal replied. Says it's some old muscle car, covered in junk and half buried in the dirt floor of the barn. Could be nothing. But sometimes nothing turns out to be something. $1,000 was a lot of money for me. It was my entire budget for food and utilities for the next 2 months. It was a stupid, reckless gamble. But Sal's words, sometimes nothing turns out to be something, echoed in my head. I had a feeling. a gut instinct that I had learned to trust more than anything else. I borrowed a friend's truck and trailer and drove the 6 hours to rural Ohio. The farm was exactly as I'd pictured, tired, weather-beaten, and slowly being reclaimed by nature. The farmer, a man named Earl whose face was a roadmap of long years under the sun, led me to a leaning, dilapidated barn at the far end of the property. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, manure, and time. And there, in the corner, under a pile of rotted tarps, old tires, and broken farm equipment, I could just make out the shape of a car. It took us an hour to clear the junk away. And when we did, my breath caught in my throat. The shape was familiar, but off. It had the aggressive, predatory lines of a late 60s pony car, but the proportions were different. The hood was longer, the roofline lower and more severely sloped, the rear haunches wider and more pronounced. It was coated in a thick layer of grime and rust, with a hideous, peeling orange paint job that had clearly been applied with a brush sometime in the distant past. It was, to any rational eye, a complete heap. "Told you it was junk," Earl said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt floor. "Previous owner of this farm left it here. My daddy just used it as a shelf. $1,000 and it's your problem." I walked around it, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I ran my hand along a fender, feeling the pitted metal beneath the grime. There were no badges, no emblems of any kind. I scraped away some of the dirt from the vehicle identification number plate on the dash, but it was corroded and barely legible. Something about it was just special. I couldn't explain it. It was a whisper, a ghost of an idea. "I'll take it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Handing over the wad of cash, a mix of terror and exhilaration churned in my stomach. It took another 3 hours to winch the petrified, immobile hunk of metal out of its tomb and onto the trailer. The whole time, I felt a strange sense of reverence, like I was excavating an archaeological find. The day after I got it back to my garage, my brothers decided to pay me a surprise visit. It was a rare occurrence, one that always signaled they wanted something, or more likely, they were bored and looking for some entertainment at my expense. They pulled up in Chad's brand new, Arctic white Porsche 911 GT3, its engine a low, menacing growl that sounded completely alien in my industrial neighborhood. They stepped out of the car, looking around my garage with undisguised disgust. "Good Lord, Stephanie, do you actually work in this dump?" Kyle asked, wrinkling his nose at the smell of penetrating oil. "I think I saw a rat scurry behind that pile of transmissions," Chad added, pointing with a shoe that probably cost more than my welder. Their eyes then fell on the new arrival, the car I had just dragged home, sitting in the center of the floor like a patient in an emergency room. A long, profound silence fell over the garage. Then came the laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was a deep, gut-wrenching, wheezing roar of pure, unadulterated mockery. Chad was literally bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air. Kyle was leaning against the Porsche, tears streaming from his eyes. "Oh my God," Chad finally managed to get out, wiping his eyes. "Stephanie, you have truly outdone yourself. This isn't a heap of junk. This is the king of all heaps of junk. Where did you even find this tetanus sculpture? Did you pay for that?" Kyle asked, his voice filled with incredulous glee. "Please tell me someone paid you to haul it away." "I bought it," I said, my voice quiet, my face burning with a familiar shame. "For $1,000. That sent them into a fresh new wave of hysterics. $1,000. Chad howled. "You spent $1,000 on that thing? Steph, I could have gotten you a much nicer-looking pile of scrap metal for half that. We could have just pushed my old filing cabinet off the roof of the dealership." They circled the car, poking at it, pointing out the rust holes, the flat tires, the missing engine. "What even is it?" Kyle asked. "Looks like someone tried to build a Camaro out of spare parts in their shed." "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, which was the truth. "But it's interesting." "Interesting," Chad scoffed. "Steph, a fungal infection is interesting. This is a biohazard. Do us all a favor and call the junkyard. Cut your losses. Hell, I'll give you the $1,000 back myself if it means I never have to look at this thing again." "We actually came by to tell you our good news," Kyle said, finally composing himself and adopting a tone of magnanimous importance. "We've just secured our spot at Pebble Beach. Front and center. We're bringing the McLaren, the Zonda, and a classic 250 GTO. It's going to put Miller and Sons on the map. Globally." "Yeah," Chad said, puffing out his chest. "While you're playing with your, whatever this is, we'll be closing multi-million-dollar deals with real collectors. Just try not to embarrass the family name too much while we're gone, okay?" They got back in their pristine Porsche, its engine roaring to life in a clean, perfect, soulless burst of power, and sped away, leaving me alone in the quiet of my garage with the smell of their expensive cologne and the echo of their laughter. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the car. Their words stung as they always did. They had a unique talent for finding my most vulnerable insecurities and pressing on them with surgical precision. For a moment, I saw the car through their eyes, a worthless, hopeless, ugly pile of rust. Doubt, cold and heavy, settled in my stomach. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had just wasted my last $1,000 on a piece of trash. Maybe I was just a deluded girl playing in a garage, pretending her hobby had meaning. I walked over to the car and placed my hand on its cold, rough fender. And then I felt it again. That little whisper. That feeling that I was standing in the presence of something more. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, pushing their voices out of my head. Okay, I whispered to the empty garage and the silent car. Let's see who you really are. The next 2 weeks were a frenzy of detective work. I started by carefully, painstakingly cleaning the car. Decades of grime and caked-on mud were gently washed away, revealing more of its strange, unique lines. I used chemical strippers to remove the hideous orange paint, discovering a layer of original, faded silver paint underneath. The most crucial discovery came when I was cleaning the dashboard. The VIN plate was almost unreadable, but with a magnifying glass and a gentle touch with a brass wire brush, I was able to make out a few of the numbers and letters. They didn't match any known production sequence for Ford, GM, or Chrysler. They were different. I spent my nights on obscure online forums, in digital archives of old automotive magazines, cross-referencing every scrap of information I could find. I sent photos to Sal, who started making his own calls to a network of grizzled old-timers and retired automotive historians. The breakthrough came from a single grainy black and white photo I found buried deep in an online archive of a 1968 auto show. The photo was of a concept car, unveiled by a now-defunct automaker, that had caused a massive stir. It was called the Ethon. It was a radical design built with a monstrous, experimental 500 cubic inch V8 engine and an aerodynamic body that was years ahead of its time. The press had loved it, but the company's conservative board of directors got cold feet. The car was too expensive to produce, too dangerously fast for the public. The project was scrapped. The official story was that the one and only prototype had been ordered to be dismantled and destroyed. But the photo, it was a perfect match. The long hood, the fastback roof, the unique C-pillar design. It was my car. I was staring at a ghost. My hands were shaking as I called Sal. I think I know what it is, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I sent him the link to the photo and the article. He called me back 30 minutes later. His voice was different. The usual folksy calm was gone, replaced by a tone of hushed awe. Kid, he said slowly. I think you're right. I called a guy I know, a guy who used to work for that company back in the 60s. He was a junior engineer on the Ethon project. He told me the story. They were all heartbroken when they were told to scrap it. But the lead designer, a guy named Robert Vance, couldn't bear to do it. He was supposed to oversee the destruction. Instead, he paid a flatbed driver to haul it away in the middle of the night. He hid it. He sold it a few years later to some farmer, telling him it was just a custom body on a Mustang chassis, making the guy swear never to mention where he got it. He wanted it to disappear to be safe. Vance died in the 80s. Everyone just assumed the car was gone forever. I sank into my chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. It's real, I breathed. It's the Ethon. It's more than real, Steph, Sal said, his voice deadly serious. It's a unicorn. It's one of the holy grails of American muscle. If you can restore this, if you can bring this car back to what it was, you're not just restoring a car. You're restoring a legend. But listen to me. This has to be a secret. A total secret. If word gets out what this is before it's ready, the vultures will descend. People will try to take it from you, claim it, bury you in lawsuits. We keep this between us until the time is right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in my garage, staring at the car. It wasn't a heap of junk anymore. It had a name. It had a story. It was the Ethon. And it had chosen me to be its custodian. The mockery from my brothers, the dismissal from my father, it all seemed to fade into the background. They were playing their game of status and brands. I was about to play a different game altogether. The game of resurrection. The next 18 months were the hardest, most grueling, and most rewarding of my life. The Ethon became my singular obsession. It consumed everything. Every dollar I made from side jobs went into it. Every waking moment, I wasn't at a paying gig. I was in the garage. I slept on a cot next to it, waking up in the middle of the night with new ideas, new solutions to the thousands of problems it presented. Restoring a normal classic car is hard enough. Restoring a one-of-one prototype is a nightmare of a different order. There were no parts to buy off a shelf. Every single piece that was missing or too badly damaged had to be fabricated from scratch, using the few grainy photos and original design sketches that Sal and I managed to unearth. I learned to shape metal, to weld with a precision I never knew I possessed. I taught myself how to TIG weld aluminum to rebuild the custom intake manifold. I spent a month just rebuilding the unique, independent rear suspension system, a design that had never seen production. The engine was the biggest challenge. It was there, thankfully, but it was a seized, corroded boat anchor. Taking it apart was an archaeological dig. Each component was unique, a handmade piece of engineering. I meticulously measured everything, reverse engineering Robert Vance's genius. I had to have custom pistons forged, a custom camshaft ground. The cost was astronomical. I sold my Mustang, my first love, the car that had taught me everything. It was a painful sacrifice, but as I watched it drive away with its new owner, I knew it was necessary. The Ethon demanded nothing less. There were moments of profound despair. I remember one night, trying to repair a crack in the engine block. My weld wasn't taking. The metal was too contaminated with ancient oil. I was exhausted, broke, and overwhelmed. I threw the welding torch down and just sat on the cold concrete floor and cried. The sheer, crushing weight of the task felt impossible. The voices of my brothers echoed in my head, calling it a heap of junk, a tetanus sculpture. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was all a fool's errand. It was Sal who kept me going. He'd show up with coffee and donuts, or a rare technical manual he'd found at a swap meet. He'd look at my progress, nod slowly, and say something simple like, "Looks like you're about 10% done with the hard part." He never let me give up. "Vance didn't save this car so it could die in another garage, kid," he said to me that night I broke down. He saved it because he knew someday the right person would find it. Turns out that's you. Now stop feeling sorry for yourself and go clean that block with an acid bath. You're burning the oil, that's why your weld is failing. He was right, of course. His practical, no-nonsense belief in me was the fuel I needed. Meanwhile, in the glossy world of Miller and Sons, my brothers were on a victory tour. Their preparations for Pebble Beach were the stuff of local legend. They were featured in a lifestyle magazine, posing in front of their multi-million-dollar inventory, talking about their vision and brand synergy. I saw the article. There was a family photo. My father, Chad, and Kyle, all standing together, beaming. My mother stood slightly behind my father, her smile tight. I wasn't in the picture. I hadn't even been asked to be. The family dinners I was still obligated to attend became unbearable. They were entirely consumed with talk of the auction. "We just had the Zonda detailed," Kyle would announce. "It cost $5,000, but the paint looks like liquid night. You can't put a price on perfection. Our logistics team has charted a climate-controlled, closed transporter," Chad would boast. "The cars will be under armed guard from the moment they leave the dealership until they're on the block. The insurance premium alone would buy your entire garage, Steph." They would occasionally turn their attention to me, a brief, charitable pause in their symphony of self-congratulation. "So, how's that project coming along?" Chad asked one night, a smug grin on his face. "Managed to get the raccoon smell out of the upholstery yet?" "I'm making progress," I said, my voice even. I had learned to build a wall around myself in their presence, a quiet, internal space where their words couldn't reach. "Good for you," Kyle said, patting my hand in a gesture of mock encouragement. "It's important to have a hobby. Keeps you busy." My father, as always, just watched, a passive observer to his own family's dynamics. He seemed proud of them, of their ambition, of the grand scale of their plans. When he looked at me, his eyes held a familiar, gentle pity. The look you give to a sweet but slightly lost child. He had no idea what was happening in my garage. He had no idea that the hobby he so quietly dismissed was about to intersect with his son's ambition in the most spectacular way imaginable. As the restoration neared its end, Sal made a phone call. It was to an old friend of his, a man named Jonathan Davenport, who happened to be one of the senior organizers of the Pebble Beach auction. Sal didn't tell him what the car was. He was far too clever for that. "Jonathan," he said, and I was in his office as he made the call on speakerphone. "Sal, you old dog, I thought you'd retired to a beach somewhere." "Not yet," Sal chuckled. "Listen, I've got something for you. A last-minute surprise for the auction. A true barn find, a mystery car. No one's seen it in 50 years. There was a skeptical pause on the other end. Sal, you know we vet our cars months, sometimes years, in advance. We can't just stick a random mystery car on the block. This isn't random, Jonathan, Sal said, his voice lowering. This is a ghost. A genuine, one-of-one prototype from the Golden Age. I've seen the documentation. It's the real deal. And it's been restored to Concours-level perfection by a single person. Nut and bolt. It's a story that will have every collector in that room on their feet. You can put it on the block as the surprise final lot. Trust me. When have I ever steered you wrong? There was a long silence. I held my breath. A one-of-one prototype? Davenport finally said, the skepticism in his voice replaced by a sharp edge of intrigue. From who? I'll tell you when you see it, Sal said. Just save us a spot. You won't regret it. Another pause and then, all right, Sal. For you, I'll do it. But this had better be as good as you say it is. When he hung up, Sal turned to me, a slow grin spreading across his face. Get ready, kid, he said. You're going to Pebble Beach. The final weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and meticulous detailing. I painted the Ethon myself in its original color, a deep liquid silver that seemed to absorb and reflect light at the same time. I polished every piece of chrome until it looked like a mirror. I conditioned the new leather on the seats I had hand-stitched myself. The day I finished, the day I finally turned the key and the massive, experimental V8 engine roared to life for the first time in half a century, the sound was apocalyptic. It wasn't the refined whine of my brother's European exotics. It was a raw, chest-thumping, primeval roar. It was the sound of thunder. The sound of a legend waking from a long sleep. Sal and I stood there, covered in dust and grinning like idiots, as the garage filled with the glorious sound and the rich smell of high-octane fuel. We had done it. Transporting the car was a cloak-and-dagger operation. We used an old, unmarked, enclosed trailer, driving through the night to avoid attention. We arrived at the staging area for the auction under the cover of darkness, checked in with Jonathan Davenport, and were immediately sequestered in a private garage, away from prying eyes. Davenport took one look at the car, his jaw slowly unhinging. He walked around it, his expression a mixture of disbelief and reverence. He ran a hand gently over the fender, just as I had done in that dusty barn what felt like a lifetime ago. He looked at the engine. He looked at the flawless interior. My God, Sal, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It's the Ethon. I've only ever seen pictures. I thought it was a myth. He then turned to me, his eyes wide with a new understanding. And you're the restorer? And the owner? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He just shook his head, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face. This, he said, gesturing to the car, is going to be the sale of the decade. Your brothers, they're here, you know. Miller and Sons. I know, I said. Good, he grinned. This is going to be fun. And now here I am. Standing backstage, I can hear the murmur of the crowd, the smooth, confident voice of the auctioneer. The air is electric, thick with money and anticipation. My brother's cars have already sold, fetching impressive, multi-million-dollar figures. I saw them on the monitor, Chad and Kyle taking a bow, looking smug and triumphant. They think their day is over. They think they've won. The auctioneer is speaking now. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final lot of the evening. Something truly special. A vehicle we have codenamed the Ghost. A true, one-of-a-kind piece of American automotive history, believed to have been destroyed 50 years ago. Pulled from a barn just 18 months ago, this is the world's first look at the legendary 1968 Ethon prototype after a complete, world-class restoration. A wave of gasps and murmurs ripples through the crowd. My heart is pounding. I can see the car rolling onto the brightly lit turntable. It looks magnificent, a silver specter from another time. And here's the most incredible part of the story, the auctioneer continues, his voice rising with theatrical flair. This museum-quality restoration wasn't performed by a large, famous workshop. It was the work of one person, a single, dedicated artist who brought this legend back from the dead. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the restorer and owner of the Ethon, Miss Stephanie Miller. My cue. I take a deep breath, push the curtain aside, and step into the light.